September 12, 1977. Althorpe Estate, Northamptonshire. 4:23 p.m. 16-year-old Diana Spencer sat crying in the rose garden, holding a letter that would change her life forever. The handwriting belonged to Jamie Hewitt, not the James Hewitt the world would later know about, but Jamie Hewitt, a local farmer's son who had just completely destroyed her teenage heart. What Diana didn't know was that this heartbreak would start a chain reaction that would eventually make her a princess, then wreck her marriage, and ultimately lead to her death in Paris 20 years later. But the most shocking part wasn't how Jamie broke Diana's heart. It was what her family did about it that shaped everything that came next. Diana had met Jamie Hewitt during the summer of 1977 at a local village fair in Great Brington. She was 16, super shy, and desperately trying to escape the toxic atmosphere at Althorpe, where her parents' nasty divorce was getting worse every day. Jamie was 18, the son of a tenant farmer on the Spencer estate, with sandy hair, kind eyes, and a motorcycle that represented everything Diana's stuck-up aristocratic world didn't allow. He was the first person who looked at me and saw Diana, not Lady Diana Spencer. She would later tell her friend Carolyn Bartholomew. When I was with Jamie, I wasn't the girl whose parents were constantly screaming at each other. I wasn't the disappointment who wasn't pretty enough or smart enough. I was just a girl who was actually worth loving. Their relationship started totally innocent. Jamie would meet Diana at the estate's old gamekeeper's cottage, where they'd talk for hours about everything except the aristocratic world she lived in. He taught her to ride his motorcycle, showed her how tenant farmers actually lived, and gave her the first taste of life outside the Spencer bubble. Diana was completely different when she was with that farmer boy, remembered Mrs. Betty Andrews, the Spencers' former housekeeper. She'd come back from those meetings glowing, humming to herself, acting like any normal teenager in love. It was literally the only time I ever saw her truly happy during those awful divorce years. But Diana's world and Jamie's world were never supposed to mix. The Spencer family had been aristocrats for over 500 years. Diana's father, Earl Spencer, was dealing with a brutal divorce that was threatening the family's reputation and money. The last thing he needed was his daughter having a romance with a tenant farmer's son. The relationship continued in secret for 4 months. Diana would sneak out of Althorpe using servants' entrances, meet Jamie at predetermined spots, and get back before anyone noticed she was gone. For the first time in her life, Diana felt what it was like to be loved for herself, not for her title or her family's status. But in the small world of Northamptonshire society, secrets don't stay secret long. On September 10, 1977, Diana's stepmother, Rain Spencer, confronted her with photographs of Diana and Jamie together, taken by a private investigator Rain had hired to spy on the Spencer kids. Rain was absolutely furious, Diana later remembered. She threw the photographs on the table and said, "Do you have any idea how much damage you could do to this family? We're fighting for our survival, and you're playing house with a farm boy." Diana tried to defend the relationship, arguing that Jamie was kind, honest, and genuinely loved her. But Rain wasn't having it. Love doesn't pay bills, Diana. Love doesn't maintain estates. Love doesn't preserve legacies. You will end this right now. Earl Spencer, weak and totally dependent on Rain's financial support, completely backed his new wife. Diana was banned from seeing Jamie again, and even worse, Jamie was told that his family's tenancy agreement wouldn't be renewed if he kept pursuing Diana. The final blow came in the form of a letter Jamie sent to Diana on September 12th, the letter she was clutching in the rose garden. In it, Jamie explained that he couldn't risk his family's livelihood for their relationship. He was taking a job in Australia and would be leaving within the week. He loved her, but he couldn't destroy his family's future for that love. "I get it now that we're from different worlds," he wrote. "I wish things could be different, but they can't. Please don't hate me. Please find someone who can give you the life you deserve. You're going to do amazing things, Diana. I just won't be there to see them." Diana was absolutely devastated. This wasn't just teenage heartbreak. This was her first lesson in how her aristocratic status would always come between her and real human connection. The boy who had loved her for herself had been forced to choose between her and his family's survival, and he had chosen survival. But what happened next would turn out to be the most important moment in Diana's entire life. As she sat crying in the rose garden, she was found by her grandmother, Ruth Fermoy, who had come to Althorpe for one of her regular visits. Lady Fermoy wasn't just any grandmother. She was a lady-in-waiting to the Queen Mother and one of the most connected women in royal circles. When she saw Diana's distress and learned about the situation with Jamie, she didn't offer comfort. Instead, she saw an opportunity. "Diana, darling," Lady Fermoy said, sitting beside her granddaughter in the garden. "I know this hurts right now, but sometimes heartbreak is life's way of preparing us for something way better." "What could be better than being loved?" Diana sobbed. "Being loved by someone who actually matters," Lady Fermoy replied. "Someone whose love can lift you up instead of bringing you down." This conversation was the beginning of Lady Fermoy's campaign to position Diana as a potential royal bride. Over the next few months, as Diana struggled with depression and feelings of worthlessness after Jamie left, her grandmother started a subtle but determined effort to get Diana on the royal family's radar. Lady Fermoy knew that Prince Charles, now 29, was under serious pressure to marry and have kids. She also knew that Charles had a pattern of relationships with sophisticated worldly women who were considered unsuitable for marriage, women like Camilla Parker Bowles, who was already married, and various actresses and socialites who didn't have the right aristocratic background. What Charles needed, Lady Fermoy understood, was a young aristocratic virgin with perfect bloodlines and no messy romantic history. Diana, at 17 and heartbroken, fit this profile perfectly. But first, Diana needed to be shaped into the kind of woman who could catch a prince's attention. The transformation started slowly. Lady Fermoy arranged for Diana to attend social events where she might run into members of the royal family or their circle. She coached Diana on royal protocol, court etiquette, and the art of appearing interested but not eager, available but not desperate. "Your grandmother was playing a very long game," royal biographer Andrew Morton later observed. She knew that Diana's heartbreak over the farmer's son had left her vulnerable and easy to influence. Lady Fermoy used that vulnerability to remake Diana into the perfect royal bride. The strategy totally worked. In November 1977, just 2 months after Jamie left, Diana was invited to a weekend shooting party at Althorpe, where Prince Charles was among the guests. Charles, 9 years older than Diana, barely noticed the shy 17-year-old, but Lady Fermoy made sure Diana was properly introduced and that Charles understood her impeccable Spencer lineage. More importantly, Lady Fermoy started spreading carefully crafted stories about Diana throughout royal circles. Diana was described as sweet, innocent, unspoiled by London society, and completely without romantic baggage. The story of Jamie Hewitt was never mentioned. Instead, Diana was presented as a pure, untouched flower, waiting for the right man to awaken her to love. Over the next 2 years, Lady Fermoy orchestrated a series of coincidental meetings between Diana and Charles. Diana would show up at polo matches Charles attended, at dinner parties where he was a guest, at cultural events he supported. Each time, she was carefully coached to be friendly but not forward, interested but not chasing. Diana was being groomed like a prize horse for auction, said a former friend of the Spencer family. Her grandmother had decided that if Diana couldn't have love with the farmer's boy, she would have power with a prince, and Diana, still broken from her first heartbreak, went along with it because she didn't know what else to do. The campaign reached its peak in July 1980 when Diana was invited to a weekend at Balmoral. By this time she was 19, working as a kindergarten teacher in London, and still carrying the emotional scars from Jamie's abandonment. When Charles showed interest in her, Diana interpreted it as the kind of genuine affection she'd felt with Jamie. But Charles's interest was totally different. He was attracted to Diana's youth, her innocence, and her suitability as a royal bride. He wasn't falling in love with Diana the person. He was falling in love with Diana the concept. She represented everything his previous relationships had lacked: respectability, purity, and the approval of his family and the establishment. Diana, still vulnerable from her teenage heartbreak, completely misread Charles's interest as the authentic love she'd lost with Jamie. When Charles proposed in February 1981, Diana said yes, not because she loved him, but because she hoped this might finally heal the wound Jamie had left in her heart. I thought if I could just be good enough, pure enough, perfect enough, Charles would love me the way Jamie had, Diana later revealed. I thought I could earn the kind of love I'd lost. The engagement was announced on February 24, 1981, and Diana became the most famous woman in the world overnight. But even during the engagement period, Diana started to realize she had made a horrible mistake. Charles was distant, formal, and obviously still in love with Camilla Parker Bowles. The authentic connection Diana had experienced with Jamie was nowhere to be found in her relationship with Charles. The night before the royal wedding, Diana called her old friend Carolyn Bartholomew and talked about Jamie for the first time in years. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to run away with Jamie," Diana said. "Would I have been happier as a farmer's wife in Australia than as a princess in a palace?" The question would haunt Diana for the rest of her life. Her marriage to Charles was doomed from the start because it was built on a fundamental misunderstanding. Diana was trying to recreate the authentic love she'd experienced with Jamie, while Charles was trying to fulfill his duty to the crown and his family. But the most tragic irony was that Jamie Hewitt never actually went to Australia. Faced with losing his family's livelihood if he pursued Diana, he had written the breakup letter and told Diana he was leaving the country. In reality, he moved to London, got a job in banking, and spent the next 4 years trying to forget the aristocratic girl who had captured his heart. On July 29, 1981, Jamie sat in a London pub watching Diana's wedding to Prince Charles on television. Years later, he would tell a friend, "I knew I was watching the unhappiest bride in the world. I could see it in her eyes. She was marrying Charles, but she was thinking about what we could have had." The wedding that the world celebrated as a fairy tale was actually the continuation of a tragedy that had started with a 16-year-old girl's broken heart in a rose garden 4 years earlier. Diana's marriage to Charles failed for many reasons, but maybe the most basic one was that she spent 20 years trying to find with her prince the authentic love she had known with a farmer's son. Charles could give her a title, palaces, and global fame, but he couldn't give her what Jamie had given her, the feeling of being loved for exactly who she was. The pattern established by Diana's first heartbreak would repeat throughout her life. She would seek real emotional connection in relationships with men who couldn't or wouldn't provide it. From Charles to James Hewitt, the cavalry officer, not the farmer's son, to Dodi Fide, Diana was always searching for someone who would love her the way Jamie had, completely, authentically, without agenda. But maybe the cruelest irony of all was discovered only after Diana died. In 1998, royal biographer Sarah Bradford revealed that Jamie Hewitt had never stopped loving Diana. He had followed her story through the media, celebrated her humanitarian work, and grieved her struggles in her marriage. He used to say that everything good about Princess Diana, her compassion, her ability to connect with ordinary people, her refusal to accept that aristocratic birth made her better than anyone else, all of that came from her time with him, Bradford wrote. He believed that if she hadn't been forced to lose that part of herself when she lost him, she might have been happy. Jamie Hewitt died in a car accident in 1999, 2 years after Diana's death in Paris. At his funeral, mourners found a worn photograph in his wallet, a picture of 16-year-old Diana laughing on the back of his motorcycle, taken during those 4 months in 1977, when she was just a girl in love, not a princess in training. The photograph had an inscription in Diana's handwriting, "To Jamie, who taught me what love feels like, I'll never forget, Diana." Jamie had carried that photograph for 22 years, through Diana's engagement, wedding, marriage, divorce, and death. He had loved her when she was nobody special, and he had continued loving her when she became the most famous woman in the world. Diana's first love had broken her heart when she was 16, but he had never stopped loving her. And maybe that was the greatest tragedy of all. The love that could have saved her was the love she had been forced to give up to become a princess. In the end, Diana's entire life, her marriage, her divorce, her humanitarian work, her struggle for authenticity, and her death could be traced back to that September afternoon in 1977, when a heartbroken 16-year-old girl learned that in the aristocratic world, love was always secondary to duty. The chain reaction that began with Jamie Hewitt's goodbye letter eventually led Diana to a palace, but it also led her to a lifetime of searching for something she had already found and lost when she was too young to fight for it. What do you think about how Diana's first heartbreak shaped her entire life? Do you believe true love can happen at 16? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more untold stories about the moments that changed Diana's destiny.